Welcome to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Schmidt, off-road endurance athlete and mental health mentor. If you're really serious about getting that next PB, you can't overlook taking care of your mental health. Because although mental health and sport performance might seem completely unrelated, when you look at how your body actually works, you'll find out that they're two sides of the same coin, which means prioritizing your mental health will boost your sport performance. I'll dive deep into the scientific connections between mental health and sport performance and give you practical strategies that will get you to the root of your depression and anxiety so that you can feel your best and perform even better. Hey team, welcome back to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast, or if this is the first time you're tuning in, welcome. I am your host, Jennifer Schmidt, and I am being joined today by a fantastic woman all the way from New Zealand, which is so cool. This is Hannah Rae we've got on the episode today, and we're going to be talking about all things resilience, related to all kinds of different topics, grief and loss, mental health, sport, all of the things. So I'm really excited to have Hannah here today. She is a wealth of knowledge about this topic, both from her personal life and her professional experience as well. So welcome, Hannah, to the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jennifer. I'm pretty excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, I think the thing that drew me to you initially, well, actually, you had contacted me first, but it was almost kind of like things just aligned, in the sense that I've been looking for somebody to talk about grief because it's not something that I have experienced a lot of myself, but it is something that I know is super important for our athletic community because there's, I mean, a million and one types of grief, but I guess for me, I haven't experienced a lot of like the death type of grief, but there's other things. It's not just been a thing that's happened in my life, but so many people around me are experiencing it, and I want to be able to support people in that journey and in that process. And you fell into my world at just the right time. So I'm so glad that you're here to talk about this today. So I want to just give you a chance here to tell us a little bit about you, about your mental health journey and how you essentially became a resilience coach.
Yeah, quite a trajectory. So yeah, my name is Hannah. I'm a resilience coach, and yes, I live in New Zealand. I live right down in the southwest corner of the South Island on the edge of Fiordland National Park. So yeah, literally have a few lakes and a few thousand square kilometers of native bush at our back doorstep, which is very special, and count myself pretty lucky every day to be able to get to live here. Yeah, and I love being outdoors. It's been quite a journey, which we'll get into no doubt soon. But yeah, just being outside brings out the best version of me. I find that moving my body, sometimes fast, sometimes very slow, through these amazing, hills and landscapes that we have in New Zealand, and feeling strong and happy in my body brings me a whole lot of joy. And yeah, as for my mental health journey, yeah, I think that really needs the context of like what it's like to grow up in New Zealand. And actually funny that, the opportunity to be a guest on the Athlete Mental Health podcast is kind of like a full circle moment for me, because if you had told 20 something me that I would be talking about this and speaking about this with you, she would be like, no, we are not doing that. So yeah, growing up in New Zealand, it's a very, I don't know, maybe it's similar in Canada, I'm not sure, like that, not, a wee bit of that individualist, but kind of like an echo maybe from our British colonizers and settlers, that came out, 150 years ago. Just that stiff upper lip, that like do it yourself DIY culture that goes from anything from like DIYing your home renovations to, DIYing your mental and emotional health, and really just, bucking up and carry on and not really talking about it. And I was thinking back through like my schooling, and it must have been part of the curriculum, but I don't ever remember any of like, it doesn't, I don't have a memory of that landing for me in a way that was meaningful. So it might have been an hour lesson or something like that. So yeah, I really just took that buck up and carry on approach throughout my teenage years, throughout university, and then into my 20s. Yeah, and if there was something that I was finding challenging or something hard had happened, I might go and cry about it by myself in private. No one would see me, and then kind of just pick myself up and carry on. But like, there was no way I was talking to anyone, friends or professionals, about what was going on inside, like inside my head and in my internal world. I was definitely of the mindset of like, you know, I can sort this. I'm strong enough. Don't need no help from anyone. Um, and then I guess that's where endurance sport came in when I kind of landed in that world in my mid-20s. Kind of by that stage, I had like it feels like I came at just the right time because I had accumulated some mental and emotional stuff by that time, like a few people that I had gone to high school with had died in various circumstances. Um, you know, like the first your like first big relationship breakup. Actually been through the Christchurch earthquakes at that stage as well. So there was like a whole lot of stuff that I was like I was living my life and starting to accumulate this, not like baggage, but you know, just stuff that I hadn't processed. So when I found endurance sport, it was like a whole new outlet for coping. Um, and that worked really well for a while because I mean, I know that you know, and a lot of your listeners will know as well that, you know, it's such a cool vibe. Like you're learning, pushing your body to, you know, through and beyond all your comfort zones and limits. You're meeting really cool people, going to like amazing places. And there's such a buzz that just carried me through for quite like probably longer than it should have. Um, and yeah, I think that carried on for like 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, and then once I reached my late 20s, there like I wouldn't have described it like this at the time, but like the cracks were starting to show. Um, and what that looked like for me at the time was, you know, like on paper, my life was pretty sweet, like it was jam-packed, but I was having like generally kind of having a pretty good time. Had a great job with a great career pathway, had an amazing group of friends, doing all this cool endurance stuff. But like below that surface, like deeper inside, I was like, I'm really just not happy. I'm not feeling fulfilled. And there was a whole lot of shame around that. Like, you know, I've got everything I could possibly want. Like, why am I feeling this way? And it wasn't, yeah, I had a conversation with a friend and we were at a cafe and I remember this moment so clearly. He's sitting across from me and he's like, just like looked me right in the eyes and he's like, are you okay? And I was like crying and I'm like, I will be okay. So like even in that moment, even when he asked me directly, like I couldn't admit that I wasn't doing that well. Um, and yeah, he went on to say like all of these things that I was doing, there's nothing at all wrong with them. It's all really cool, but unless I have that something deeper or you know some kind of deeper meaning, whatever that means for me, like that gap or that hole is always going to be there. And at the time, I took that on board, but didn't really do much with it. I was like, I'm too busy to think about that. Just, um, and I figured that it would kind of all work itself out. And in a way, it kind of did, but not in a way that I would ever have anticipated or ever wished on anyone else. Is that so within about a year of that conversation, my friend had died in an accident in the mountains. My dad had also died from cancer, and my paternal grandfather, so my dad's dad, had also died, and I've been really close with him and my gran ever since I was, ever since I landed on this planet. So that whole like grief, like triple whammy, just broke everything wide open and forced me to like, really, really forced me to evaluate what, the beliefs I held about life and myself, and yeah, really just changed the whole direction of my life. So I guess that's the short version, even though that probably felt quite long.
No, I appreciate you sharing all of that because I think your story is not uncommon. In listening to it in some way, minus the deaths at the end, like it also feels very similar to my story as well. And just, and I know we're not the only two out there in the sense that like you find endurance sport at the moment, kind of when you need it the most. And
Mhm.
as a recreation therapist professionally, I mean, it's an amazing therapy. It is because it gives you, like you said, so many things. It was like the community and all the cool people that you're meeting. It gives you something to strive for. There's always like goals and different things. So it really is a powerful therapy tool until we don't, like when we only use it, I guess, to mask everything instead of actually using it to deal with stuff. And what I see, and I'm guilty of this too. So for anybody that's listening, don't ever feel like you're a bad person for this. But oftentimes we're like literally running from something, and we use sport as an effective coping mechanism, and that's fantastic. But if we never actually take the time to deal with it, like you said, the cracks eventually kind of just open and the floods are coming through. So we need to also process outside of sport while being able to use sport as a place where we can escape from the stuff, but not only escape for it. It's going to catch up with you. It's always faster than you, no matter how hard you train.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. And I mean, I just like the loss part, like I can't even imagine losing that many people in such a short period of time. Like, how does a person even just like in my like I'm trying to articulate this. In my head, I'm thinking of like how do you even like you get the news of one person and then you're barely even grappling with that and then all of a sudden you get slammed with the next one. Like, how do you even take all that on or like what was going like how did you even begin to process that in the moment?
Mm. Yeah, you're right. It is like they kind of stack on top of one another without, felt like never getting a chance to take a breath. Um, and it just that I'll share a wee bit about the detail, the timing of things as well, because I think that will be helpful. Um, so it was mid-October in 2018, and my dad had been in chemo treatment, and then he was going in for the stem cell treatment, but we then got the news that he wasn't healthy enough to have the stem cells put back in. And so, basically there's nothing else we could do, or what the doctors could do. And it was just a matter of like waiting for, how long he's gonna be, how much longer he's gonna be with us for. And that was, I mean, like when you get a cancer diagnosis with someone close to you, like that's pretty confronting. And I was definitely starting to question, well, like, ponder over in my mind over those kind of 6 months since his diagnosis, like, what is this life all about? And what what about death? Like, like there's just so many questions around it. And he was 58 at the time of his diagnosis. So I was like, well, that's not going to make sense. Dad's not going to die. Um, and so we had this news that basically the prognosis was now terminal. And so I reached out to my friend Caleb, that same one who I'd had the conversation with, or he had asked me the question saying, "Are you okay?" And so I reached out to him. He was out of town, but I was like, I really need to talk to you and share this with you. And, it was basically probably like my first time asking for help. And we arranged to meet for lunch the following week. And because he was away on a trip in the mountains over the long weekend. And yeah, it was on that trip that he had his accident, which put him in ICU for 4 or 5 days. So yeah, instead of having lunch, I was visiting his bedside in ICU, and then yeah, he died. Well, they took him off life support a couple of days later. So kind of all of that, like I think that just adds a bit more context to
Mhm.
it, as in, like we knew that Dad's death was coming up, and then one of my like most trusted friends has also gone. That was definitely like having, thinking about it as like you're standing in this river and you've got this little patch of dirt to stand on while the river's rising, floodwaters are coming in. And then with Caleb's death, it was just like all of that solid ground. Anything I had to stand on was entirely washed away. Um, and then so yeah, this is probably when I that started to break me open to being able to speak with other people about it, because Caleb lived such a full life, like beyond full, that he had so many different connections and different people from different parts of his life. And I got to meet some really incredible people around that experience. And it was kind of through that shared loss, like many of us had never met each other before. Um, yeah, and through that, like following weeks and months, I definitely leaned on a small group of those people. And while our relationship and our bond with him was all very different, um, yeah, there was just that a really lovely Venn diagram of like different people, but all having that similar, like Caleb in the outdoors type of crossover, which was really lovely. And I mean, you're asking about, how on earth do you get through that? 5 weeks after Caleb's death, I had been signed up for this 6-day endurance stage mountain bike race that we did in teams of two. And at the time, like, I never thought about saying to my teammate, like, I don't think this is a good idea for me to do. It was like I didn't really consider quitting or pulling out. I was just like, like in a way, like trying to hit those training sessions was like my handle or like my guide rail through those like early weeks that were, yeah, really, really hard. Um, and then the race itself was like I pushed myself the hardest, like the deepest that I've ever gone. Um, so yeah, like not necessarily a healthy way, but it worked. And then after Dad died, so about 3 months after Caleb's death, it was the opposite. Like I knew that I'd dug like myself so deep into, you know, finishing that training lead up and the race itself for the mountain bike race. And like the grief on top of that, I really just needed to like just stop. And that's basically what I did. I just pulled it all right back, and walks and yoga was about the extent of my movement through that. But yeah, movement and people were probably, yeah, the two big things that helped me get through.
Hmm. Oh, there's so much I want to unpack here. I mean, like that sequence of events, like I literally, like when you said that you were planning lunch and then it didn't happen, like my heart was just like, oh my God. So I can't even imagine being in that moment and having to navigate that. Because like you said, with that, I love that visual of the water rising, but then everything getting pulled out. So one thing I wanted to ask you around that is there was like a point there where you actually basically got up the courage to actually ask for help. So what change, or did anything change for you around like having that vulnerability and then having that essentially like withdrawn from you? Did that change how you asked for help in the future, or whether you were open to it, or what did that look like?
That's such a good question. I think that was the point where I realized like things were so hard that I realized like I actually couldn't do this on my own. Whereas everything else had been, not feeling quite fulfilled, and, in a sense, like I can see it now, like reflecting on kind of the years leading up to that, like putting myself in a position of burnout. Um, all of that was, it was tricky, but I was like, I can get through this, or like just until, next month, or, I can go another day, I can go another week. But with that, it was just so overwhelming. I think, yeah, it just really sounds really cliche, but really just hitting a rock bottom, and like not being able to live inside my skin without asking for support. Um, yeah, and I think we'd had, um, probably by that stage, I'd known him for about 4 or 5 years, and we'd had some like, nice, deeply meaningful conversations. But for me, that was only like a foot deep at that time. But yeah, just over that time had felt like we'd built up, or had proven that he could be trustworthy in holding anything even slightly vulnerable that I did share. So it's, yeah, like kind of like that really desperate need versus that, for a first time branching out, like having that trust and safe enough space cultivated was really important. And I can't remember the second part of your question, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, just like how did it affect your ability to like, I mean, I think you kind of already answered it, but kind of how did it affect your ability to reach out after, which as you mentioned, because you were at that rock bottom place, it wasn't kind of as hard or as difficult as maybe you expected. But yeah,
Mm,
if you have anything else to add.
um, no, I think in like in terms of community and grief and asking for help, those people are kind of just there, which sounds a bit silly, but and they were like fun, nice, decent people to be around. So yeah, and it was probably not like joy, but it was probably the only time around that time that I felt like I could be held and be, you know, a bit more open and honest about what I was actually going through, because they were basically going through the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, that was probably like me dipping my toes in the water. Um, and then when would that be? Like, yeah, I did reach out to a counselor after Dad died. Um, but I didn't find that very helpful. I was already doing everything that, all the, if you're in the, you know, interested in looking after your body and general wellness, then you're probably doing most things pretty well. Um, and then, yeah, it wasn't until a bit later on that I started exploring different modalities, um, which that's probably a whole nother conversation as well. But, definitely energy work and body work and movement, because there was so much like I didn't have language for what I was feeling. So like, what was the point? Like, I didn't feel like could go and talk to anyone about it and feel like that would be useful. Um, my, and I think like maybe now that wouldn't be as true, because I have this whole other like understanding, and I have some of that language. And I do see a therapist now, and I find her amazing. But certainly for those early days when I was coming out of my really like 2 foot thick shell, that was exactly what I needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Community is so important no matter what we're going through. Like the research shows it, our personal experiences show it. So I'm so grateful that that was something that was available to you at that point and actually allowed you to kind of crack through that shell a little bit so that you could work through all of the things that were coming at you because there was a lot.
Mm.
hmm
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think the other thing too, going back to how you kind of processed it initially and like, you went into the bike race and I think you used the word like used your training as like a handrail to kind of guide you through. And I think that there's a lot of value to that because in that moment, you don't really know what to do. And sometimes routine is just literally all you need. Now it's tough because it's like endurance sport obviously is really draining and stressful on the body. And then you already have a whole other level of like mental and emotional stress. But just to have something consistent and a goal that you can move yourself through for those first few weeks is probably was probably almost the best thing that could have happened. Like it might
Yeah.
have been a bit intense, but also like we talked about the power of endurance sport. But I love that you were able to also at some point have a recognition that like, okay, this is too much and it needs to end. So I don't know if you have any recollection of this, but was there like a moment in time or an experience where you realized this is this I need to stop. Like I need to stop moving. I need to slow down and take care of myself. This isn't helping.
Mm. I don't feel like there was, one big like light bulb moment, but definitely I was staying in a friend's place at the end of that mountain bike race and remember just sitting outside. And I was like, you asked me to walk down that hill, well, I won't be able to come back up. It was just absolutely exhausted. And I think like alongside that, um, I had been doing yin yoga for quite a long time, like, but with my athlete brain, being like, I'm gonna go to yin yoga and get more mobile and more flexible so then I can run faster. Like there was, yeah, absolutely not an ounce of self-care intention in there at all. Um, but I think in a way, like it had been doing its work on me subconsciously, and I had still been trying to, whenever I could, go to these yin yoga sessions. And I think over that, and that's part of the routine as well. In grief, I definitely made sure that I went to at least one or two of those classes a week. And yeah, I think it was, during that time, like I remember, hmm, probably in the months after Dad died, when I had taken my foot off the pedal quite a lot. And just noticing how in those classes, how I felt so held and so nurtured. And like I could go to those classes and kind of be with people, but not have to talk to them. Because that's like a really strange paradox. Probably not just grief, but like when you're going through something hard, or maybe you're feeling shame around some emotional stuff that you've got going on, or like you kind of just want that company, but you don't have to talk to anyone about it or make small talk. Yeah, I found those yin classes really amazing for that. Um, I do remember crying a lot. Um, but yeah, it was just a really beautiful place to kind of invite that transition. And I think it, yeah, just worked under the surface over that period of time, more so than being this like one light bulb moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all know that feeling after a big race of like, the I can't, if you make me go down there, I can't get back up. But
Yeah.
at the same time, I'm also having a laugh because I'm recalling, oh my goodness, the first half marathon I ever did. I was in Vancouver and there was an after party. It was, oh my gosh, it was a Lululemon race and they just, I don't know, they know how to do an experience. Like, I mean, I studied recreation in university, so you learn the core of how to make an experience, and they had it nailed. So this after party was like possibly the funnest night I've ever had in my life, and I was so exhausted, but somehow also rallied and had a fantastic time. And my friends that were with me who did not run were like, "Can we go home?" I'm like, no, we're still going. So we've all been in the place where you were, where you can't even think about doing anything. But also somehow I feel that most of the time we have somewhere deep within us we could rally. It's like mentally we think we couldn't, but as soon as it
Mhm.
happens. But it sounds to me like you hit like the wall, the absolute wall, that there
Mm.
was nothing left. Even if it was the funnest party that ever existed, there was nothing left.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it sounds like yin yoga was a big part of, coming back to yourself or like navigating this journey, I guess, for you. Was there any other knowledge, tools, experiences, anything that you learned along the way that we would say would be like this was possibly the one thing? I don't know if we want to, if you can necessarily say one thing, but something that
Yeah.
really stands out to you as being a powerful tool that you learned that's helped you and
Mm,
continues maybe.
mm. So it did actually arise out of going to those yin classes. Um, a couple of years after that, I had an opportunity to join a yin yoga teacher training, and I was just going there just because I was so curious. I'm like, I'm going to find out what all this wizardry is all about. So I did that, and that's really where this whole I've been doing a little bit of like reading, listening to podcasts, getting like a nervous system 101 type understanding, but going to that training really opened it up to a whole new level. And then from there, I went on to do, further training in like mind, body, and somatic study, which, really cemented and kind of like, like that aha, like making the whole of my experience of the previous like 5 years make a whole lot of sense. Um, and just like understanding about the nervous system and what stress really means. Like you know, um, and understanding like it's not just stress as in like, oh, I'm so busy, I'm so stressed out, but it's these stressors. Like, yes, there is the obvious stressor of the physical training load, but there was also like the emotional stuff of not really feeling fulfilled, and then the grief, and questions around, questions that threw up around like identity, and then also at the time, um, well, I have a diagnosis for it now of endometriosis and fibroids, which I was experiencing that pain, like my periods were a nightmare at the time, but I was like, oh, what is going on? Like my periods are a total nightmare. So kind of looking at how all those pieces and stressors of like the jigsaw puzzle and how that truly impacts your nervous system, put like, that my time like deep in the endurance world plus grief, really all like made it make a whole lot more sense. And and like another layer of that is like knowing that, there's science, like this all makes sense, allowed, me to remove some of those narratives of like self-blaming and self-judgment and criticism, could really just take that step back and invite in quite a bit more self-compassion. Yeah.
I love that you bring that up because I think there's so much power in understanding what's actually happening in your body. And for anybody that's listened to this podcast or followed me for a while, like that I'm totally obsessed with the human body and how it's all connected and things. But I really do see that switch. It sounds like which you also had, but in my clients and people that I work with and things, that when they actually get it, that like, oh, this is how this works in my body, it creates this whole other level of motivation and compassion and also I guess, desire for change. Because when you don't get it, I mean, I use the example all the time, which is not really mental health related, but I use the example of we talk about like eat your fruits and vegetables because it's good for you. And that's kind of where it ends. But when we actually learn why that's important and how the only place that you can get is basically all of the building blocks of every function in your body is from fruits and vegetables, then you're like, oh, so if I don't eat this, then my body doesn't function. And so I'm just always not really working. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like when you
Yeah.
actually, I mean, that's a very simplistic explanation, but when you break it down to that, and it's the same, like you talked about the nervous system, when we actually get what a stressor is and what it does to our body and how that affects how we show up for every area of our life, it's so motivating to be like, oh, okay, maybe I do want to do something about this. It's not just like, I'm just going to reduce stress because it's probably good for
Mm,
me, you know? So I love that
mm,
you had that experience of just like knowledge is power, essentially.
yeah. And I guess like that comes into like the whole why around resting. Like, you know, athletes, we all know that, you know, a rest day is like necessary and crucial. But it wasn't until having that nervous system understanding that I was like, well, resting, like putting my feet up and binging on Netflix or sitting and scrolling on my phone or, you know, checking out in some other way isn't actually rest. Not in that, you know, that rest and digest or flow, or I call it the green zone of like having that opportunity for your body to actually come into like full coherence and proper rest. Um, I think, yeah, that really, that kind of that first year of grief and starting to implement that type of rest into, you know, like social rest, yes, but the emotional, mental rest, like, and that's been proven or shown in recent bereavement research as well, is like it's definitely not a 5 stages thing. That's a whole other conversation, but it's about that oscillation between like, yes, go into it and really touch into those feelings and feel them, but then to come out and do something that lights you up or hang out with people that make you laugh or you're allowed to smile. So yeah, really, that was probably in that first year a really powerful thing for me too, that I've pulled all the way through to present day.
That's such an important topic. I actually have, oh, a few episodes back now, I have an episode all about the difference between resting and recharging. And you're totally right. Like when we just like
Mhm.
binge on Netflix or scroll through our phone, like we think we're doing something that's helpful for us, but it's not actually resting your nervous system, which for especially for endurance athletes, for everybody, but for endurance athletes specifically is so, so important because our nervous system is just blown up
Yeah,
from our
yeah.
lives and the things that we're choosing to do in our fun time.
Mm. And I wonder if you see that a bit, or like if you notice it in your work as well, like a certain personality type as well that is drawn into endurance and maybe an even, you know, greater need for that rest or recharging,
hmm
proper rest.
I think
Mm.
so. Yeah. I mean, I would say the typical endurance athlete tends to be type A, and very, goal orientated and I don't know how to I don't know how to put it into words. I'm thinking just like big achievers.
Mm.
Somebody doesn't sign
Ambitious.
like yes, exactly, ambitious. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because you don't just sign up for an Ironman or a marathon or an ultra marathon for funsies. Like I mean, you do at some point when you're deep in it, but when you sign up for that first one, like you got to have something a little special about you.
Yeah.
It's a unique breed.
Yeah. And yeah, that's really interesting because I really got a chance to um, really try that out in that first, like my first grief year. I won an entry to a 5 day ultramarathon in the Wadi Rum Desert in Jordan. And through my training, I brought in that self-compassion and approached it just in a whole different way, having a bit of that nervous system understanding. And I was like, I would switch around trainings or, you know, not do them or adjust them like way more easily than I had in the past. And there was also very little for me riding on it. You know, like you're saying, like usually you go in there and you're like, I'm gonna, you know, hit a certain time or yeah, do this big audacious thing. But my intention was just to go there for an adventure and for an experience, and yeah, to not prove something, whether that's to myself or to anyone else. And it's so changed like the whole experience of it.
Yeah.
And then I spent 2 months in France after that, eating lots of bread and cheese and drinking wine. So it's an amazing trip all around.
No kidding. How, like, I mean, I know you didn't
Balance.
go there for your time and stuff, but did you notice any differences in your performance, even that, like with taking that approach with having a relaxed, calm nervous system, or how did it feel?
Um, that's really interesting. The event itself be so different from anything else. Like I'd never done, more than a day of running at a time before that. And it was like 40 plus degrees in the sand. There's nothing to compare to that that I'd done here in New Zealand. But yeah, the experience of training, and then I was still in that, like, this might sound bananas to someone who doesn't do endurance, but I was still in that recovery phase from of like a tendency towards burnout. Um, but again, like having that structure, having that routine was another like longer term guide rail to get me through, the later part of that first year. So yeah, I probably don't have a direct comparison, but definitely my experience of the preparation and the training was just like I don't know, what's this? Like having a weight off, or like being able to exhale and not have all that probably that pressure and expectation on myself.
Hmm. Yeah, it's huge. Having even unconscious pressure, even when we're not like, I think a lot of people that listen to this are kind of like laugh because they're like, oh, I don't win anything, or this kind of thing. And it's not even about
Yeah,
that.
same.
It's like I'm not usually going out there to win anything. It's just, but when you actually are just going somewhere literally for the sake of being there and for an experience, there's just a totally you train. I find that you train almost more intensely or more intentionally, maybe is a better word. I don't know. It's weird. It's just completely a different experience, and I kind of love it.
Yeah.
But I
I
also
think
love the
like,
intensity too.
yeah, this has been coming up quite a wee bit for me in the past few months, is like, the facts of an experience are probably never, they're not going to change too much. Like you're going to do your training plan, you're going to go to this race, and, plus or minus, depending on the distance, plus or minus 10 minutes, that's kind of going to be about your finishing time. But, you can approach it with like that kind of like that desperate type of intensity, or you could approach it with this like fun, I'm having a freaking awesome time type of intensity, and that really changes like the whole experience.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then really at the end of the day, I don't think your time changes that much. And I would love to see research on this, but I would argue that your time actually possibly improves because your nervous system is actually in a calm state and you're more prepared for your training sessions and more recovered overall. So, I mean,
Mm.
if anybody has research on that or wants to be the person that starts that research, let me know what the result is because I would love to know. So, another question that I had for you is a lot of the grief and such that you experienced was more related to death, but there's also a lot of other places that grief can come from and experiences that people can have that cause them to have this sense of loss. I'm thinking about like, things in sport, like you don't qualify for the race that you've been aiming for forever, or that you've had a huge train, like a block or something leading into it or whatever. When you transition out of sport, whether that's a choice or whether that's forced from an injury or something like that, you lose an identity, which is another type of grief. Or even like you talked about earlier, one of the things early on in kind of your stages of life and stuff was like a breakup, or, other people go through a divorce. So grief doesn't always just happen with death. It's just a type of loss. But do you have any recommendations or thoughts about how that might be different or how people might navigate that differently or maybe navigate it in the same way?
Mm. I have a lot I could say. I'm so pleased that you've asked that question, because yeah, when I started Rewild You, my coaching business, um, kind of since then, in the last 2.5 years, that's something really interesting that's come about. Because when I started, I was focused on bereavement because that's what I was super passionate about, and I'd personally encountered like really a woeful lack of support in that area. Yeah, and I actually think, before I carry on, like defining like the definition that I use for grief is a natural response to loss. And if you think about that, like loss can come in so many ways. and in some of the ways that you just mentioned as well. So yeah, when I started like talking with people, working with people, I found that the messages that I was sharing on the work supporting people through bereavement were actually resonating, connecting with people that had gone through like injury or relationship breakdowns or, like job loss or like a stage of life transition. And I kind of like, once you get through, for everyone, it's a bit different. But for me, it kind of happened about that 12-month mark, like post bereavement was like, well, like what happens now? Who am I now? What do I do next? And all of those same questions come up, whether that is any type of change or disappointment or adversity. And yeah, I have this concept that sits in my mind. And I'm not sure if I've like read it or heard it, or it's just kind of morphed into something over time. And that's like the grief of the unlived dream that kind of I feel like is permeating a lot of all of us. Because when you think about unlived dreams and those types of like losses, like that type of grief is absolutely everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And really, yeah, that ties into like, literally a loss of a dream, like not being able to, maybe not making the qualifying cutoff for a big race, or not being able to compete for whatever reason, or injury. Like injury is quite a common one, especially quite a major injury, like a show-stopping injury. I've worked with quite a few people around that, because that comes with, even if it might be temporary, that loss of identity, but you don't know necessarily when that, when you're going to be able to pick up that identity again. And then, as you say, with like, transitioning out of sport for whatever reason, and the identity tied up in that. And that's where I like to bring in the nervous system, because we have those like, the three main kind of states or responses that we all are pretty familiar with, being the fight, flight, the rest, digest, and the freeze. But there's also like that social nervous system and that social element that's always working to protect us. And yeah, like thinking like that can be so strong. And we might not feel like we can survive that situation of not belonging, because when you think back to our cave people days, being cast out of your group was a real threat to your life. So having that changing identity at that nervous system level might feel like we're actually leaving our safe community and where we feel like we belong, to a place of maybe not belonging or not quite sure where we belong. So yeah, and then yeah, the breakup or like relationship breakdown, I can hop into that shortly. But yeah, I wondered if you had any other questions or thoughts around those ones.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're right. I appreciate that, again, that nervous system connection, because that it helps to explain again that why piece of, sometimes we
Mm-hmm.
go through
Yeah.
this stuff and you're thinking, why is this why is this so hard? Why is this taking me so long? And also knowing that there's so many people, honestly, probably almost everybody going through some sort of loss similar to this at the same
Mm-hmm.
time as you, and we don't even know, just all on completely different levels when you talk about the loss of like a big dream. So there's like that why piece, but also that connection piece of knowing that you are not alone in this. It might not be the same loss, but
Mm-hmm.
we can have so much more compassion towards people, but also towards ourselves, and knowing that this is a normal part of life. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's almost like we expect, yeah, almost like it's grief might also be like dislocated expectations. I have a
Hmm.
friend who uses that phrase quite a lot.
I love
Um,
that.
like you expect things to go a certain way, which you could think of as like a dream. And then when they don't, like, and yeah, this links into the relationship breakdown stuff too. But like when they don't, like your brain's having to figure out a new way, or like trying to readjust to like well, if that's not happening, then what is this reality all about?
Hmm. And I think the other thing too that's sort of connected to that and also kind of brings me a little bit circled back to your original experience of when you very first started endurance sport too, is that we often assume that our problems aren't like big enough, that we like don't
Mm,
even need to like reach out or connect to people or talk about them because a loss of a dream is just like, oh, like you said earlier, stiff upper lip, like suck it up. Not everybody gets to
mm,
live their dreams. And so we just like kind of shove all that away and think that it's not important. But that actually, because of how you explained the nervous system and how it was a survival mechanism for us to be a part of that community, and having that loss actually disconnects us from our community when at the same time it also can connect us to our community because we're all going through it in some shape, way, shape, or
mm.
form. So yeah, it's kind of a bit of a circle thought, but yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I feel like my thoughts went 10 places at once in that moment, but
Yeah. I've mostly followed.
yeah, yeah. Your problems are never too small is one of the things that I just
Mm,
wanted to come out of that, is that, we think that we shouldn't be feeling this way, and there's a lot of shame around that when our problems seem little. Like your story and my story are the same in that sense, is that it started that way, that nothing like I have a pretty good life on paper, things look really, really great, but I still feel off inside. And I think that's such a common human experience.
mm. Yeah, and I just wanted to add to that as well. Again, bringing like the science of the nervous system into it is like because we all arrive at these experiences and events with our own very unique nervous system and lived experiences and even intergenerational backgrounds. Um, and then we also have, because of that, we have our very individual nervous system responses or tendencies and ways that manifests. So just by naming an event or looking at it from the outside, we have no idea, absolutely no clue, like what impact that is going to have on someone's system. And yeah, so yeah, while it might, something might seem small or big to someone, it might be like the opposite to someone else and how they experience it in their body.
That's a great point. That's a really great point. So, in other words, don't over or underestimate your nervous system, because every
Hmm.
situation is going to affect you completely different
Hmm.
based on what you've experienced. So
Yeah.
that's a really good thing to know. Yeah.
Mm.
I think the other thing, and I think this will tie into some of the relationship breakdown stuff as well, but one of the things that I find really interesting about loss that isn't bereavement is that the social networking is totally different. Because I think when you lose
Hmm.
like when somebody dies for at least a period of time, and again, I haven't experienced this, so
Yeah.
if I am totally out, like off here, please let me know. But from my understanding, the community kind of rallies around you for a period of time. Eventually, I think that kind of falls off.
Yeah. It
But
does.
there's a chunk of
Yeah.
time where there is community
Yeah.
there for you and you feel very supported. And, people are showing up at your house with meals, and there's flowers, and there's
Hmm.
some sorts of supports. But in all these other
Hmm.
types of loss, it's so strange because none of that happens. And especially with, I think, with like breakups or divorce, there's this automatic jump to um they were a jerk anyways. You didn't need them. You're going to be so much better off without them. There's so many more fish in the sea. And when somebody dies, like nobody's saying that stuff.
No.
Um,
Mm.
it's been like something that I've been thinking about a lot lately, like going through my own life and having, a relationship breakup in the past like few months here, and just how different that is. And when are we like, we're not ready, oftentimes we're not ready to hear these types of things. And I think that can really impact how you navigate the loss versus like, I'm so sorry for this person dying, and sharing all the positive memories you have versus like,
Mm.
he's an asshole. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if you have any
Oh.
comments on that, of just like, and it doesn't just have to be in breakups, it's also with any of those other kind of like, I'm going to call them ambiguous losses.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
but
Mhm.
yeah, any thoughts around
Yeah.
that?
Oh man, I so love that that we're talking about this and that you've brought this up because yeah, there's like all those those non-bereavement type losses. And as you kind of said before, like, oh, it's not that bad. But, really, that you look around and you can not like, I'm, I'm getting like a vision of like people imagining me walking around like a cartoon with like X-ray vision and I can see exactly everything that's going on. But that's not the case. But just the way like conversations like you're part of or that you might overhear, and you can like sense that there's this whole kind of like soup of unacknowledged and unresolved grief of all those other different types of losses that are kind of just around in people in our communities. And yeah, the thing with like relationship, breakups or breakdowns, the paradox there is like you don't have that finality of them dying, but it still, on that physiological level, still has so many like can trigger very similar responses. Like, neurologically, your brain is having to like it literally remaps its like your mental model, your mental map of like where this person might be at any given time, how you might contact them, um, how long it might take for you to hear back from them. So if it's, someone that you've been living with and then all of a sudden they are they've moved somewhere else and then you don't know where they're going to be, you are probably, you know, not like it's not supposed to, but like for a boundary reason, you're not contacting them and you have no idea if you did, like if or when you might hear back from them, and that's very similar to, similar but different to bereavement. Like your brain is remapping, probably, doing some different type of pathways, but like, they're not going to be anywhere at a certain time and you're never going to hear back from them. um, and then the same similar responses at that nervous system level as well is like, that's and bring in that social aspect as well, like especially if you've had shared circles and shared communities. There's a whole lot of unknown in there, just uncertainty in general and in your future, disrupting your identity and how you kind of orient yourself in the world. And then also like depending on how that experience was of the breakdown, whether there might be some like fight or flight or freeze responses kind of woven in there as well. And yeah, I'm really interested to hear from your experience as well. Like when people say, they want to be helpful or like want to show that they're on your side by saying like, oh, you could do so much better, or plenty more fish in the sea. That really brings me back to the nervous system as well, because it's natural. We want to support someone and we want to like belong. We want to be on their side. But the really quick way to do that is to make an enemy of the other, like the ex in this case. And, that's part of that's kind of like future focus. It might feel invalidating for that person that you're trying to support. Like you're not acknowledging what is going on for them in the here and now. And it might also make, that person that you're intending to support be like, well, like, man, that person you're calling a jerk, like, we had some really good times together and I love that person. And so does that mean there's like something wrong with me? Um, yeah, I'd be really interested to hear if that lands for you or if you've seen that happening in other places.
Yeah, I think well, yeah, it definitely lands. I think the automatic default for me anyways is to defend, because like exactly what you just said, it's like this person that you're calling whatever,
Mhm.
um that was my person. So it's
Yeah.
always just really interesting to navigate that, because nobody's ever being malicious about it. Like they're coming from a
Mm.
place of just like you said, wanting to support and rallying, but
Mhm.
it's like they're like 10 steps ahead of you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Back it up. Let's be
Mhm.
here right now. Where like it sounds silly, but it's like kind of like this person has literally died in my life, even though they're still here.
Mhm.
So it's just like a very,
Mhm.
very strange place
Yeah,
to be.
it's very strange. And I think kind of to try and summarize all of that is like if you can see that your nervous system treats an event like that as a major disruption, not just like an emotional or mental thing, that can allow, again, taking away that shame or judgment and bringing in some more self-compassion.
Yeah, the back to the why.
Yeah.
Just bring it back to science. It's
I-
gonna be okay, guys.
yeah. I mean,
Oh.
that's just like it's not like the full solution, so to speak, but it's like I think it's a really powerful kind of first step to
Mhm.
having that understanding.
I think so. I think it's the first step in having self-compassion and coming, or I guess going from that place of what's wrong with me? Why do I feel like this? Whatever, all the other narratives that come
Mm,
along with that, to being like, oh, there's a reason that this is happening. And so that awareness, I think, just can really help a shift happen, even if it's just that small perspective change can just, yeah, make the
mm,
hugest difference.
yeah.
Mhm. The other one thing I wanted to ask you is I know that you have kind of a framework that you use when you're working with your clients, the Reclaim framework. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how that works and how you kind of move people through that?
Mm. So the Reclaim framework was really born out of my own experience through grief and bereavement. And as we've spoken about, I've since learned how that applies to any major change or adversity or transition. And then I've further kind of refined and fleshed it out and made it more comprehensive with all the other trainings and further study that I've done. Because it's like, because we, as I spoke about before, we all have our own very wonderfully unique, like lived experiences and kind of constructions of our nervous system. It's tricky to be like, here's your roadmap. Take these 7 steps, and you'll be like totally fixed forever. But I kind of think as a framework like this as the next best thing. Like it has a structure, um, but it's adaptable, and all of the knowledge and the teaching in there is really just helping you, like guiding you back to yourself and rediscovering who you are, what's important to you, bringing in that nervous system understanding, you know, bit of emotional intelligence 101. Yeah, so Reclaim is an acronym for the 7 modules or topics that we work through. And so I won't go into them here, but it's on the website if you want to check it out and see what's involved in each of those. So yeah, like all the material is online, and then we just meet up 101 weekly to really help it land, answer any questions, and really integrate it and make it personalized in the life of the person that I'm working with.
hmm That's huge. Having a roadmap, I think I appreciated, I guess, what you said about how, the seven, there's not just going to be 7 steps. Everybody's experience is so different. But also at the same time, when you're in, like, deep in this stuff, it's so uncertain and you're just, where do I even start? So having something to go off of and some steps
Mhm.
to be like, okay, I can see that if I do these 7 things and I work through these things, that thing, everything's at least going to be clearer. It doesn't mean it's going to be better, it's going to be 100%, but at least there's hope in knowing that there's something that can be done to navigate this. So I
Mhm.
appreciate that you have something to work through with people.
Mm. Mm.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah. So if there's somebody that's listening to this right now, they're kind of deep in it, whatever type of loss that might be, what is something that you would tell them to either do or think or adjust or anything like that that would be take help to take the edge off now?
Yeah. So you can probably guess, but I'm going to suggest to bring it back to your nervous system.
Yay.
Because because when you're in that, whether whatever the struggle, whether it's like an overwhelm or you're just feeling, I don't know, like you can't do anything, or everything feels a little bit hopeless, or things are just like too hard or impossible, there's a pretty good chance your mind is going like 1,000 miles an hour in 1,000 different directions, like maybe ruminating over the past, maybe having questions or, anxiety about the future, like looking for answers, trying to make sense of it all. But your mind is really feeding a lot of the time off the state that your body is in. So we can start by shifting your nervous system into, or inviting it to shift into something a little bit different. So, you might describe it as like a moment of safety, of grounding, of, a little bit of ease, like talking about that oscillation that I was talking about before, like going into the hard stuff and then bringing like your whole mind body system into that, moment of ease, or even joy or pleasure. So one thing you can do like right away, like even listening right now, is to just find an anchor, something to like bring you right out of your head. And for some people, that might be in your body. That doesn't work for everyone though. So for people that does work for, like really feeling into your feet, feeling the ground supporting beneath you, spending, really good 5 to 10 seconds in that. Or, I really like holding your thumb and a finger together, and really just sometimes find myself like switching between all of them, and just kind of like a tactile distraction in a way. And another one that I really like, and I actually only just learned about the science behind this recently, because I find like whenever I go to a new place, or even if I'm at home and like kind of looking for just a break, like I find my eyes like going to the horizon. And the science behind this is like, because when we are looking at that close up view, like we do so much of, like on our phones, on our laptop screens, on the TV, even talking to people often is quite close up. But that's always like in that activated system, like you're not, maybe not necessarily in a fight or flight, but your body is, kind of in a heightened state of activation. But if you're looking out into the distance, looking towards the horizon and getting that really wild, wild, wild and wide angle view, really invites that parasympathetic, that rest and digest into your system. So even just looking out as far as you can see in for 5 or 10 seconds, trying that on and just noticing if there's anything that shifts in your body.
Mm-hmm. Those are all so powerful, because you're right. Sometimes coming into your body, especially if you're feeling a lot of emotion, can be really scary, because it's like there's, when you get into
Mm-hmm.
somatics and stuff, emotion shows up, right? And wherever you're feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes the body doesn't feel super safe. So going outside the body into something can be really helpful. So I appreciate both of those suggestions. And I want to just like highlight a quote here that you said, and I'm probably now going to butcher exactly what it was, but that your mind and all the thoughts that you're having are a reflection of the state that your body is in. I just really,
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to emphasize that, because that is so, so important, is that we often kind of disconnect our body and our mind. And I mean, we hear like mind body medicine or mind body stuff is kind of like I would say like a catchphrase, but
Mm-hmm.
it really is a true thing. And it is about your nervous system, and it is about your physiology, and how all of those things are working literally affects how your thought processes create themselves. So when you're in that state of anxiety or rumination or whatever that is, instead of asking what is going on, what is wrong with me, it's
Mm-hmm.
thinking about what's happening in my body right now. And that can be such a big change. So yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I really
Yeah.
appreciate that, but also just want to make sure people heard it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a fun fact to help that land, which was like one of the first fun facts about the mind body that I learned, was like about the vagus nerve. We have this collection of nerves connecting our brain to the rest of our body and our organs. And we know that's a two-way, like highway of information, but 80% of that information is going from our body to our brain. And I think if you think about that, that tells you everything that you need to know.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. That's huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
There is a lot of communication that's happening that we don't even know. And then we wonder why we act in certain ways and we think certain
Yeah.
things and do all this stuff. And it's like your body does actually send you messages. So best to listen to them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've appreciated this conversation so much. There's so many gems in here. I hope that our listeners are able to take as much away as I did and learn how to navigate some of the muddy waters out there, because it is like human existence is not an easy thing to go through, and there's going to be a lot of turbulence and ups and downs and big life changes and losses along the way. And so I really appreciate that you took the time today to share your story and some of your wisdom about navigating all of that. For anybody that's listening today, how can they learn more from you, or where can they get in touch with you if they're interested in working with you in some capacity?
Thanks so much, Jennifer. The best place to find me is on Instagram at RewildUHQ. And yeah, all the links that you should need are in the link in the bio there. And yeah, I love chatting and connecting. So please do feel free to send me a message in my DMs.
Perfect. Yep. And I will put all of those details as well in the show notes so that you can just follow straight through and find it really, really easy. Again, thank you so much for coming on today, Hannah, and sharing all of your wisdom. And we look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Thanks so much. It's been a real treat. And yeah, I just appreciate the space that you've created for these conversations. And I know that the 20-something version of me, like this is a resource that she would absolutely have benefited from. So I'm so grateful to have this chance to share all of this with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm so grateful that there is this type of opportunity, that even just in my mind, I'm thinking about like how a lot of my listeners, I actually have quite a few listeners in New Zealand, which is quite funny, but
Cool.
how this even exists. Like we can actually, you and I have met and have been able to talk, and there's a space for it. So yeah, that's huge. And thank you so much for being a part of it.
Yay.
Thanks again. Thanks for tuning in to the Athlete Mental Health Podcast. I hope that today's episode has got you thinking and has inspired you to take action towards improving your mental health. If you're looking for more tools and insights on boosting mental health and sport performance, join me in my Instagram community at Ignite Health Coaching. Be sure to drop me a DM to say hi and let me know what your biggest takeaways have been so far. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the podcast so you'll get notified every time I drop a new episode. Sending you all the strength and energy that you need to crush your training, racing, and life.